Okay, so I just received the signal that we can start. It's my great pleasure to welcome everybody to today's BIH lecture, again online. And it's my special pleasure and privilege to welcome Andrea Frank, who will give the lecture today. She is the Deputy Secretary General and a member of the Executive Board at the Stifterverband. Many of you know the Stifterverband as a funding organization, or may even have received funding from one of their stifters, but the Stifterverband also acts as a non-profit think tank. Andrea Frank has tremendous experience in the design and implementation of higher education and science projects at the interface of science and research, the business sector, and society. She's responsible for the focus of all program activities at the Stifterverband in the fields of education, science, and innovation, which I assume must be quite a challenge. The Berlin Institute of Health considers transfer, which we like to call translation, as critical part of its DNA, so much that it defines itself as the Translationsforschungsbereich, so that's the Transferbereich, the third pillar of the Charité, besides hospital and medical faculty. Therefore, BIH is highly interested in a tool to categorize its transfer activities, reflect on its transfer profile, and compile indicators for recording and presenting individual transfer fields, which, as I understand, is exactly what the Transferbarometer is. And therefore, we are very much looking forward to your presentation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ulrich Dirnagl, for the kind introduction. Hello and welcome to everybody to this lecture. I'm quite excited that there's such a high interest in a very technical issue that's not really dealing with research as it's in the core, but that is dealing with how we assess our collaboration or your collaboration, the collaboration in research and teaching with external partners. The idea of the lecture today is that I would like to present you the key results and lessons learned from a project that we just have finished in January, and that looked at how we conceptualized transfer knowledge exchange at different institutions and how we can monitor or assess our transfer activities and use it to further develop our institutional profile when it comes to knowledge exchange, or how you call it, translation. I would like to start. I would like to give you an idea of who participated, how we went about the project, and then present you the key results, meaning the transfer classification as well as the toolbox for the quantitative indicators. I would like to start to give you an idea who worked on this project. It was kind of a from the community for the community project. We had a call for interest within the university community as well as within the Helmholtz community. And as you can see in the slides, we had a consortium of 5 universities and 6 Helmholtz-Centers who started out with us on this journey. I think what's interesting about this group of organizations is that they included very different institutions. To just pick 2 examples, we have, for example, at the University of Düsseldorf, which does not really have a focus on technology transfer, but has a strong focus on teaching and research with and involving society. And we had other institutions like the RWTH Aachen, who's very strong in entrepreneurship and technology transfer, but not as strong when it comes to collaborating with societal partners. And if you look at the Helmholtz research centers, we had big infrastructures like the DESI, as well as other organizations who have a much diverser transfer profile, like, for example, the Umweltzentrum Leipzig. So it was quite a challenge to see how we could within this group of institutions define the similarities and how we could also deal with the differences, organizational differences, but also different strengths and weaknesses within their profile when it comes to knowledge exchange. So this is important to understand the work that we did. So what was the motivation? Ulrich Dirnagl already said a little bit about our organization. The Stifterverband focuses very much usually on universities. And over the last 5 years, we have run a program. It was called Transferbarometer, and we visited more than 50 universities to discuss with them about their strategy on transfer and knowledge exchange. And whenever we started these discussions, there were two challenges that we were confronted with at many universities. The first was that there was not really a common or a joint understanding of what do we mean when we talk about transfer and knowledge exchange at this specific institution. That was one of the challenges. And one of the other challenges was that there was a lack of indicators or lack of transparency when it comes to data on activities regarding knowledge exchange. So we figured we're trying to run a project that would deal with these two challenges. And we found Mercator Stiftung and Stiftung van Meteren who also put in some funding, as well as the two organizations, Helmholtz-Gemeinschaft and Stifterverband, who also picked up some money to make this project possible. When we started off, we also asked the participating institutions, what is the most important motivation for you when it comes to a toolbox that deals with the reporting on knowledge exchange activities. And there were three motivations that you see in the middle, and the things around the three bubbles are quotes from the participating institutions. So the first motivation was how can we improve governance and how can we further develop an institutional profile profile when it comes to knowledge exchange and transfer. That was the first motivation. Second motivation was how can we improve our internal and external communication about what we do at the interface of our institution and external partners. And the third was, of course, expectations of politics and also society when it comes to accountability and when it comes to what societal impact do institutions or universities have. These were the three motivations that we started off with, and of course, when we look, and I don't know, this is probably not very new to you, but when we look at the status quo, we of course see that current indicators fail to capture a broad understanding of knowledge exchange or different transfer profiles. I just gave you three examples of very established indicators. And as I said before, the participating organizations, of course, had a problem with the current indicators to really capture their activities, to really describe their profile. And at the same time, there's not really a standardized set of indicators that would fit to a broader understanding of knowledge exchange. This is where the Transferbarometer comes in. It questions, expands, and refines existing indicators for business and technology transfer and offers suggestions for further standardizations, but it also broadens this perspective on transfer and knowledge exchange and tries to develop a set of indicators that capture these activities that exist and develop beyond technology transfer. We have the use cases that, of course, are based on the motivations that I talked about before. We also, of course, discussed about the benchmarking that's going on for the universities, very much on the Länder level. But I think for Helmholtz-Centers, it takes place within the Pact for Research and Innovation. There's a set of indicators that they have to collect data for, and also within this set of indicators, the Helmholtz-Centers and also other non-university research organizations feel that They are not able to really talk adequately about their strengths in knowledge exchange and are not able to really talk about differences and different profiles. But we said, if we would really develop something that can be used for benchmarking also by external science policy actors, we would actually talk a lot more about how we can compare similar institutions with the indicators. But here the focus is not the benchmarking, the focus is how can I use these indicators and the data collection to further develop my own organization and talk about what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. So this is important to when it comes also to the use of the toolbox. The understanding of knowledge transfer is in this project is based on a broad understanding. It means, and it includes all forms of collaboration and cooperative activities between scientific institutions and external partners from business, politics, the social sector, the public sector. So it's a very broad understanding that was the basis for our discussion. I would like to look at the three key results and also the benefits that we see for universities and non-university research organizations. I would like to start with a so-called transfer classification. I show you the picture, don't be overwhelmed. I will try to lead you through it a little bit so it can be understood quite easily. The transfer classification for us was the starting point of our work, and it's a conceptual framework that reflects the understanding or the broad variety of transfer activities that are possible. When you look, and I said that before, when you look at your institutional profile, it's key to develop a common understanding of what you mean when you talk about a technology transfer. Ulrich Dirnagl at the beginning said it's part of your DNA at BIH, and I think in many universities, non-university research organizations, they would also say it's part of my DNA, but they don't really know what they mean when they say this. And so at the beginning, usually there's a discussion on how do we conceptualize transfer, knowledge exchange, translation in your case, or translation, and how do we then further develop it. So we decided to look at two dimensions in this transfer classification. We first looked at the institutional requirements that are important framework conditions within an institution when you decide to really further develop or strengthen your transfer or cooperation culture. And we looked at strategy, incentives, and appreciation, at the processes and also the resources. And for many institutions, it's important to look at this part of the institutional requirements to then find out that maybe it is not possible to further excel your activities if you do not work on your institutional requirements before. We then looked at the transfer fields, and we looked at the participating institutions, and in iterative workshops we tried to describe different transfer fields using typical activities. And what you see are 8 different transfer fields, and if you look at it a little closer, you see that we have rather classical or traditional transfer or technology-oriented transfer fields like research-based, collaboration, and commercialization. But we also looked at fields that have not been described in detail so far, for example, research infrastructure. We looked at emerging fields, for example, research and development with society, that have not been established for such a long time. And what we also can see when you look at the 8 fields, there are some fields that are more relevant for universities, like transfer-oriented teaching and training. And there are some transfer fields that are more relevant for non-university research organizations, for example, infrastructure. Important is, of course, that as an institution, you will not have the whole range of activities, but usually your profile or your DNA will be composed of a specific combination of these transfer fields according to what are your strengths and weaknesses at the interface of teaching, research, and also external partners. We then used this classification to collect typical activities and also developed indicators for each transfer field. We divided it, and this is the second result, in a set of core indicators. The core indicators provide a brief representation of a transfer field by means of a limited number of important indicators with high informative value, and were also identified as relevant and practical by the participating institutions. They created transparency with regard to the nature of the core activities within the transfer field. We then added optional indicators, we called it. So if you have a broad variety of activities in a certain transfer field, you might want to dig deeper and look at specific elements of this transfer field, and these optional indicators give you the opportunity to choose and look at different aspects. We collected ideas for indicators, and then this is important for the project, we tested them. So all the 11 institutions went out, used the indicators within their organization, and we came back and talked about what worked, what didn't work, what was too much work to find out, what is already existing in data that the organizations have. So it was kind of a develop, test, and then revisit. And it was quite an interesting learning experience. I will later on show you the toolbox so you get an idea of what kind of indicators we identified for the toolbox. So what could be possible use cases? Within the group of 11 institutions, we had two main use cases. We had organizations that perceived themselves very clear about their profile, so they have a clearly defined profile and selected areas of potential. And when they went into the testing phase, they looked at these transfer fields, looked at the institutional requirements, and then collected quantitative data that would help them to underpin the strengths, or that would help them to further develop their fields of potential. The second use case was organizations that actually had an interest to understand their broad profile and had an interest to have a more transparent, to be more transparent when it comes to their activities. So they used the whole set of indicators and did a survey at their institution. For example, the University of Kassel went about this way and had then data that would give them an idea of where are hidden strengths, where are weaknesses, and gave them a basis for further development. And these institutions usually plan now to repeat the survey like every 3 years and see what has happened, or how have strengths developed depending on where you put resources. And so this is the second use case that we saw within the group of participating organizations. Finally, we did workshops on what could be the potential and the added value for different stakeholders within the organizations, the leadership, the management of technology transfer or transfer service units, researchers, as well as other administrative colleagues. And I would like to quickly go through these 4 groups. The leadership said that especially the classification would help them to further define and sharpen their understanding of transfer and their institutional profile. They received a data-based analysis on the status quo that would help them to further develop their profile, and also would help them to decide on where to put resources for central support structures. The transfer professionals, they would also use the survey to get an idea of strengths and weaknesses within their institution, but it also helped them to make outstanding project visible, to appreciate activities within the organization, and to motivate researchers for further activities. They also use it together with the leadership as a basis for resource allocation when it comes to supporting structures within the organization. And also what was interesting is they used it to look at their data analysis routines. Many organizations have something like a research information system. They have regular surveys on various activities in teaching and research. And so it helped them to also look at their routines and think about how could we include transfer-related questions and data analysis within our existing routines in the organization to reduce the workload when it comes to collecting new data. And finally, the researchers, that was kind of also an interesting insight. 2 universities did a survey all over the institution, especially in areas that had not been visible before when it comes to transfer activities, social sciences, humanities, fields that were not as visible before. And it had a very positive impact on the researchers. They felt seen. They were surprised that what they do was actually seen as relevant when it comes to knowledge exchange. So it was quite a great kickoff for further dialogue with these disciplines and these faculties that were not as much involved as in the strategy building before. Finally, we also had dialogue with the science policy. I think especially for institutions, for non-university research organizations, the federal policy makers look at the Pact for Research and Innovation and always look at how they can improve their set of indicators. And we have a tension there between trying to compare institutions and their achievements on the one hand, and the idea or the wish of non-university research organizations to report a little more according to their institutional profiles. And within the dialogues or the dialogue with the science policy, we urged them to at least use indicators that are practical or that have been tested, and also make them more aware of the diverse profiles of universities and non-university research organizations when it comes to transfer knowledge exchange. I would like to wrap up at this point with a little outlook, and what I would like to stress that this Transferbarometer is not a fixed toolbox, but it's a living instrument. I said at the beginning that there are certain fields that have not really been captured very well yet because institutions are not very far in their development, like open science or open innovation activities, open access activities. So there's a continuous work on how we can further develop the toolbox. It does not solve the impact issue. We have a number of indicators that look at the outputs. We have a number of indicators that look at outcome. What are the next effects of your activities? But we have not really looked at transfer knowledge exchange, starting from the impact objectives and looking back at what should be done if we want to have a certain impact. So we have not solved the impact issue. It is not really designed for benchmarking. It's more designed as a tool for organizational development, looking at your DNA and finding out how you can further strengthen your DNA when it comes to transfer. And it needs feedback from the community to make it increasingly relevant. maybe to wrap up at this point, I would like to give you a quick insight into the tool that we designed on the web, and I think it might be interesting if you further explore it after the lecture. Unfortunately, it's only in German yet. We have 3 publications, and one of them, the one on the left, in the left corner, the bottom left corner, will be available in English shortly. But I think the most interesting result is the toolbox, the interactive toolbox, and I just show you a little, give you a little idea. You can, within the toolbox, explore the different transfer fields, find out about the typical activities and the indicators. So I'm just choosing one. Let's see, I'm choosing this. So when you go into the different transfer fields, you get a little description of the transfer field. We try to define it quite in detail. We collected typical activities and also tried to describe them. We collected the key indicators, we named them, described them, and also added a question for a possible survey. And this is interesting because you can actually collect your own setup. So you can combine indicators from different transfer fields, add your own indicators, and download it as an Excel sheet so you can use it for surveys within your organization. So I invite you to maybe after the lecture go into this, see if you think it's interesting, give us feedback if you think something is missing, whatever thoughts you have on this, we are very interested in it. So this was only to give you a quick idea how you can use it maybe for your own activities. And I would suggest, Ulrich Dirnagl, that I stop here and we see if there are questions from the group. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sure. So thank you very much. This was, I think, a very concise overview of a very complex issue and also a complex tool in a way. And I should congratulate you. I also would invite everyone to check it out. I did it, and it just takes a few minutes, and then it becomes very clear. It's very intuitive, and it sounds more complicated than it is if you work with it. And I also think it is a very smart way of conceptualizing a framework and showing multiple dimensions, and also at the same time helping to explain all the different features that are in such a in such a complex framework, because you always can click on information and so that you know what is meant by it and so forth. So I think this is very, very helpful, very interesting. Just to structure the discussion, we invite you to send in your questions via the chat. That's the easiest way of doing it. Just type it into the chat and I will read them for you. I would also hope that you could switch off your camera and or your microphone, because there's one that is just on now that I see. Well, let me see. Okay, so this is how we do it. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat. While people are thinking about questions or comments, I'd like to use my privilege as the host here to ask the first one. And actually, you have when I played with it, it immediately appeared to me, and you alluded to it in the very end of your presentation. It's very heavy on inputs and outcomes and outputs rather, and there are a few outcomes, and there's definitely no impact that is considered. And this seems to be by design. In fact, you just said it, that it's by design. So my question is, why is this? And B, are you planning to have sort of a more outcome-oriented version for different purposes, or do you think it's too complicated and impact is too far away, too hard to measure? So what was your thinking in being so input and output oriented?
We actually set out with a goal to be more impact oriented, and then we had a workshop with different organizations that are quite far with an institutional approach to impact. And what we found out, or what we were more aware than even, is that it is very difficult with an approach that is dealing with more than one institution to look at the impact, because it would actually ask you to start with the impact. I mean, you could also, so for example, you could identify something like strengthening, I think I only know the German word, Wettbewerbsfähigkeit stärken, competitiveness of a region, to improve the competitiveness of a region, or to an impact could be to Arbeitsplätze schaffen, to increase a workforce in a region. But the goals or the objectives of the participating organizations are very diverse. For example, the Helmholtz-Zentrum für Gesundheit is more into translation like you are. But the University of Düsseldorf has a very different approach to their impact when it comes to knowledge exchange. So we realized within the discussion that it would need a very, you would have to define your impact objectives on an institutional level, and then use the indicators, kind of going back to your activities. If you would like to have this impact, what's your underlying assumption, what you need to do, what's your underlying assumption, what are the activities you need, and then what are the resources you have to put in. So, and this made it actually in an approach that includes more than one institution with diverse objectives when it comes to impact, made it not dealable. We couldn't do it actually in this group of people. But what we like to do, and this was interesting, when it came to the transfer fields, this became a little more easier. It became easier because when it comes to entrepreneurship, you could maybe have a set of impact objectives that you could standardize, and then go back and try to think about quantitative indicators as well as qualitative indicators to describe your impact. And this is something we also found out. It will always be a mix of a quantitative approach, but it will always need also conceptualization with a qualitative approach. And as you all know, with impact measurement, the causality decreases the further you go towards impact. But maybe one comment on this, we also found out that some of the institutions are quite far when it comes to outcome. So they do, some of the Helmholtz research organizations actually, like the UFZ, the Umweltzentrum Leipzig, they really look at not only at their activities, but they follow up on them and ask a year later, what are outcomes that you did not expect? What are outcomes like follow-up projects, or like effects on the target group that you did not expect that happened? So some of the institutions within their fields that they are very strong already looked at these effects that their activities have, like a year after their projects or 2 years after the projects. So we discussed this, but we then said we cannot do it at this point. As you probably know, and then I finish up, as you probably know, is that there's some project by the BMBF that looks at impact of research that's running. There's a workshop today actually on this project, and we would like to pick up this discussion also as a follow-up on this project, and see how could we develop a smart answer to the question, how can we assess impact by universities or by non-university research organizations?
Thanks. So one way of using the tool you have and still progress towards impact or outcomes is to is to just add it as a field, because as I understand, you can add your own. So I think as an institution you could introduce those on your own. Now we have a couple of questions, and so I would like to read the first one, and it's by Cyril Charret. And the question is, could this be applied to assess the potential of individuals? Now it just flipped. So of individuals in knowledge transfer, or is your system only meant for large institutes?
What do you mean by individuals? Do you mean to assess, for example, on a researcher level, or?
Person, I think I understand the question, and I hope I explain it properly for Cyril Charret, but I would argue the idea is, or the question is about, could this be modified or even used as it is to assess individuals of the organization? Could be on the governance level, but it's probably more, let's say, on the researcher level. Could this be used to assess how researchers are faring in these particular things on an individual level?
Mm-hmm. It is used to, when we look at the universities, they use it to identify activities that are important to them and that they would actually include in their, I don't know, LOM, the performance-oriented payment system. So if you have, let's take the University of Aachen, if they before only looked at IP relevant things because and third-party funding, and they say now for our it's important that we are getting stronger in teaching, transfer-oriented teaching and training. They could look at the indicators and include them in their performance-oriented measurement system. They usually, every institution has this, and signal to the individual professor that this is an important part of the performance measurement within the institution on an individual level. And so this is how it translates, I think, into the individual level. Yeah.
Okay. Next question is from Miriam Kip, and the question is, where do you see the link to the improvement of processes of research production, i.e. input on research quality, e.g. reproducibility or robustness of methods and results, etc.?
I give you an example. I don't know if it has a link to robustness of methods. Maybe it has. I give you an example where it could actually have a link to the quality of research. For example, there were participating organizations that had a strong focus on transdisciplinary research. So they had an institutional objective to include non-academic partners in the development of their research and teaching questions. And in the transfer field of teaching and research and development with society, this is kind of the focus. And when you look in the indicators, it asks the researcher to think about who you would include to reach your objective within the project. And it would also ask the researcher to look at, have you included the right group of people when it comes to the objective of your project. So I think if you look, especially in this field, I would say if transdisciplinary research is important to you, you could use it to really systematically look at your research projects or development projects and prove or assess if you have a high quality of when it comes to involving external partners. Now, in other fields, let me think about this, robustness of methods. So this would be, for example, concerning transdisciplinary approaches. This is the only idea I have, actually, spontaneously. I would have to think about it a little bit. Miriam, thank you for the question.
Okay. The next question is from Thomas Gatzlik. How do we bring the insights from a more general academic perspective into a practical, usable and measurable tool with clear definitions of the relevant parameters? So far, it is an interesting toolbox. Diversity will help to find an individual solution, but this will also cause more chaos because everyone has a different understanding. I suggest the next step should be a setup of 3 to 4 different combinations of which should be used. This will help to gain a common understanding.
You could actually standardize more if you say there are types of organizations, like typical transfer profiles. For example, a big technical university would be strong in certain combinations of transfer fields, and then you standardize as a typology. But actually, it is quite standardized, because if you decide, our suggestion would be, if you decide you have the fields that are more technology oriented, it's like basically 2 fields. It's entrepreneurship and research-based cooperation. And if you are strong in research infrastructure, you should look at these 3 fields, take the key indicators, and that would be your key set of indicators to be used. And if you say you would like to explore entrepreneurship a little bit more, you take the optional indicators. But as we found out in the group, if your main focus is not to benchmark yourself with another institution, but your main focus is to look at your strengths and weaknesses and decide where to improve, we decided this level of standardization would be enough. Also, it's maybe Thomas Gaslik, it's also where does it come from? The Stifterverband is not the organization to standardize the indicators for the university. So this is also maybe our self-understanding would not be to offer a fixed set of indicators for all institutions, but our understanding is to offer a toolbox that could be used of the institutions themselves.
I also have an additional comment to this question. I would argue, and I was expecting that you are saying this, that the strength and value of such an approach is not to have a tick box with set criteria. It's a process. And so by having this as a, maybe even with stuff that doesn't belong to you and your own understanding of your organization, you just have to get rid of it, but you start discussing it. Yeah. And you may be getting aware of that there is other stuff out there that you have not thought about. But if you have fixed templates, this is our university template, a medical university template, it's already, you're already in this box. So I thought the strength of this particular approach is that it widens your view, but it does not confine you to this view, because you have to tick these. If you go into the toolbox, my understanding was if you untick them, for example, they are gone in your Excel sheet. And if you have your own, which you don't find on this list, and but throughout the process you discover them, you can just introduce them. So I thought this is pretty smart, actually, as a process for an institution.
Maybe, yeah, that's a key point. And I give you an example out of the process. We had a technical university that realized over the definition of the transfer fields that, of course, research infrastructure is an important field to them, because they have a number of research infrastructures that have a unique selling point. And they realized that they do not really have a common understanding how they define key research infrastructures, and it helped them to kind of define it for themselves, and then start to, with the first survey, start to find out what's there in the university. It's a very big university, and the central administration actually does not really know about all infrastructure. And I think this was also an aspect where they really could learn from the DESI. The DESI, as a big research infrastructure, has a very elaborated way of looking at their infrastructure, finding out about who they're collaborating with, why, if they are being recommended to others. So it was very interesting, and we found out that the universities are lacking this. And it's only I think it's only interesting for universities who have big research structures, but it really helped them to kind of guide their thinking about it. And so this is kind of what you said, Ulrich. You know, it helps you to kind of go in an organized way about it if you further develop your knowledge exchange strategy.
We have a further question from Gady Goldsobel, and the question is, thanks for the talk. It sounds like a meaningful tool. In what format channel would you like to get feedback, questions, or comments?
We have on the website that was also linked to the talk. We have a contact person, Cornitz Lehmann-Brauns. Just call him up, send him an email. He would be the one who kind of collects all the feedback right now and also uses it for follow-up activities that we are planning this and next year. So it's Cornitz Lehmann-Brauns, and you find him on the web page. He's happy to get your feedback.
Okay, so I don't see further questions in the chat. If you have questions, there's still an opportunity to type them in. We have the opportunity to get a little bit deeper and maybe even bit more concrete after a short break we will have in a minute, and then have the opportunity to discuss with our speaker, meet the speaker. And that's an unusual format for our lunch, for our seminar, but this time we thought this is a great opportunity to have you and get a little bit deeper into details. Everyone's invited. It will take place in GoToMeeting, so you don't have to switch to any other platform. You just stay on. After a short pause, we will get back. So I don't see any further questions. Then I would like to thank you very much for your talk. I also have the pleasure to announce our next lecture, which will be given by Anita Bandrovsky. She is currently a Einstein BIH Fellow, but she is at the Department of Neuroscience of the University of California, San Diego, and she is also the founder and CEO of PsyCrunch. We don't have a title yet, what she will give it to us soon, but I know, because I know Anita, what she will be talking about. She is one of the world experts in automated extraction tools to extract information on certain features of publications. She's particularly interested in quality features, like was there some randomization, did they register a protocol? There's so many things that kind of add up to this very loose construct of quality. And so this is her specialty, but she in principle she knows a lot about the tools of the trade, and she will talk about particular applications, and we will have a title soon. So hope to see you there. I just see in the chat that we now have a 10-minute break, and for those of you who are interested in continuing the discussion, just join us in 10 minutes. So see you there, and thanks for being with us. Bye-bye.